They'd been sleeping together since our wedding day, maybe longer. So I ran, until gunshots forced me into his car. He saw my pain, offered friendship. Then he whispered, "Let's destroy them." What I didn't expect? Falling for him. This is my story. The scent of honeysuckle, thick and cloying, drifted through the open French doors of the sun-drenched living room. Eve traced the rim of her wedding china teacup, the delicate gold band on her finger catching the afternoon light. Outside, Daniel laughed, the sound warm and familiar, echoing from the perfectly manicured lawn where he was showing Chloe the new roses. Chloe, her best friend since college, her confidant, the person she'd shared every secret with, including the agonizingly sweet anxieties of planning this very wedding 6 years ago. They looked like a tableau of perfect contentment. Daniel, her childhood sweetheart, her husband, tall and handsome, Chloe, vibrant and laughing, leaning close to admire a bloom. Eve's smile felt brittle. A tremor of unease, long dismissed as paranoia, flickered again. She pushed it down. Silly. They were her world, her inseparable trio. Their history was a tapestry she cherished. Childhood picnics with Daniel, university escapades with Chloe, the merging of their lives into this beautiful, seamless whole. Her phone buzzed, a forgotten backup device she'd been searching for to retrieve old photos for a surprise anniversary album for Daniel. It had slipped behind the dresser months ago. Plugging it in now, it whirred to life, notifications flooding the screen from years past. Amongst the clutter, a series of messages sent to this phone but never received caught her eye. Sent by Chloe, to Daniel. "Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. How long do we have to pretend?" Sent date, 3 weeks before her wedding. Eve's breath hitched. Her fingers, suddenly ice cold, scrolled frantically. Meeting Eve for dress fitting feels surreal, doesn't it? Knowing what we know, 2 months before engagement. Remember that weekend at the lake house? When Eve thought we were both working? Still my favorite memory. 6 years ago, the room tilted. The honeysuckle scent turned sickly sweet. She scrolled back further, back before the engagement, before the ring, back to the early days of her relationship with Daniel. Messages filled with stolen moments, longing, and a shared, horrifying secret. Years. They'd been lying to her for years. Not a recent lapse, but the foundation itself was rotten. The fairy tale wasn't just cracked, it was built on quicksand. Every cherished memory, Daniel proposing under the oak tree, had Chloe known? Chloe helping her choose her wedding dress, had they laughed about it later? Countless shared dinners, holidays, confidences, dissolved into ash. Poison seeped into every recollection. Chloe's advice, her sympathetic ear during rough patches with Daniel. It wasn't friendship, it was reconnaissance, manipulation. The betrayal wasn't just Daniel's infidelity, it was Chloe's intimate, calculated treachery. It was her entire history rewritten as a cruel joke, played by the two people she loved and trusted most. Numbness descended, thick and suffocating, muting the sharp edges of agony but amplifying the hollow void within. She couldn't breathe. The teacup slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor, a discordant symphony to the collapse of her world. She didn't move, couldn't. The laughter outside continued, oblivious. Hours later, or perhaps minutes, time had lost meaning. Eve moved with the eerie calm of absolute devastation. She packed a single worn suitcase, essentials, a few photos of her parents, long gone, a blessing now, a single book. She avoided looking at the wedding portrait hanging in the hall. On the pristine kitchen island, she placed a sheet of plain white paper. The pen felt heavy, alien. She wrote only 3 lines, the ink seeming to bleed the life from her. "Daniel, I know about you and Chloe. I know it's been since the beginning. There is nothing left to say." Eve, no name, no plea, just the unbearable, undeniable truth. She didn't look back as she walked out the door she'd once crossed as a blushing bride, into the cool anonymity of the night. The scent of honeysuckle followed her for a block before fading, replaced by the damp exhaust of the bus that carried her away from everything she knew. The city was a roaring beast, indifferent and vast. Eve found refuge in its anonymous embrace. Whispering Pages, nestled between a bustling cafe and a shuttered tailor shop, became her sanctuary. It smelled of dust, old paper, ink, and the faint, comforting aroma of Mrs. Henderson's perpetually brewing peppermint tea. Shelves groaned under the weight of stories, worlds upon worlds offering escape. Eve embraced the quiet chaos, reshelving misplaced novels, meticulously cataloging new arrivals, losing herself in the rhythmic ritual of running the ancient credit card machine. She rented a small, sparse studio above a laundromat. She spoke little, smiled rarely, a polite, distant ghost haunting the stacks. Her vibrant spirit, once as bright as Chloe's laughter, had been extinguished, leaving behind a quiet efficiency. Mrs. Henderson, the bookstore's elderly owner with eyes like faded sapphires, observed Eve's profound sadness but respected the walls she'd built, offering quiet kindness without prying. Eve buried her shattered heart beneath layers of routine and the printed words of others. Here, amidst the stories, she wasn't the betrayed wife or the foolish best friend. She was simply the quiet girl who worked among the books. The pain was a constant, low thrum beneath the surface, but in the dim light of whispering pages, she could almost pretend it didn't exist. Almost. Months bled into one another, marked only by the changing displays in the bookstore window. Autumn painted the city in fiery hues, then gave way to the brittle gray chill of winter. Eve moved through her days with mechanical precision. The raw agony had subsided into a deep, persistent ache, a constant companion she'd learned to carry. She found a grim sort of solace in the predictability of the bookstore. The morning ritual of turning the sign to open, the scent of paper, the soft chime of the bell, the quiet murmur of browsers. She avoided looking at romance novels. One frigid evening, long after the streetlights had flickered on, Eve locked the heavy oak door of Whispering Pages. The city sounds were different at night, sharper, edgier. She pulled her thin coat tighter, clutching a worn copy of Wuthering Heights, a grimly fitting choice, to her chest like a shield. She usually took the well-lit Main Street to her bus stop, but tonight, a commotion erupted at the far end of the block. Raised voices, harsh and guttural, sliced through the air, glass shattered. She recognized the insignias hastily sprayed on a dumpster, two rival gangs claiming territory. Fear, cold and immediate, pricked her skin. She couldn't go forward. Turning sharply, she slipped into the narrow service alley beside the bookstore. Darkness swallowed her instantly, the only light a sickly yellow glow from a single bulb high above a back door halfway down. The familiar scent of damp brick and garbage was overlaid with the acrid tang of something burning. She moved quickly, silently, hugging the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. Just get to the other end. Just get out. A gunshot cracked, shockingly loud in the confined space, echoing off the brick walls. It came from the street, but the sound ricocheted, disorienting. Then, pounding footsteps. Not retreating, coming towards her, down the alley. Panic, primal and blinding, seized her. The carefully constructed walls around her emotions crumbled, replaced by pure survival instinct. She dropped her book, turned, and ran. Her boots slipped on wet pavement, but she didn't stop, driven by the terror of what pursued her. The alley seemed endless. The footsteps grew louder, closer. She could hear harsh breathing. Despair threatened to choke her. Then, ahead, a sliver of light from the cross street. And idling at the very mouth of the alley, engine purring with quiet power, a sleek, obsidian black car. A lifeline, she didn't think. She wrenched open the passenger door, threw herself inside, and slammed it shut. "Drive, please, now!" she gasped, her voice raw with terror. She pointed a trembling hand back down the dark alley. "They'll kill us both. Drive." The driver turned. He wasn't what she expected. Not rough, not gang-affiliated. He looked expensive. Mid-30s, perhaps, with sharp, intelligent features framed by dark hair swept back from a high forehead. His eyes, a startlingly pale gray in the dim dashboard light, widened slightly in surprise, then narrowed with intense focus as they swept over her, her wide, terrified eyes, her disheveled hair, the sheer animal panic radiating from her. He didn't speak. His gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, down the alley where the running figure had almost reached them, silhouetted against the distant streetlight. Then, with unnerving calm, he smoothly shifted gears and pressed the accelerator. The powerful car surged forward, leaving the alley, the footsteps, and the unseen threat behind in a heartbeat. He drove with effortless precision, navigating the city streets. The silence inside the car was thick, charged with her residual terror and his palpable curiosity. Eve slumped against the leather seat, trembling violently, trying to catch her breath that came in ragged gasps. She risked a glance at him. His profile was sharp, composed. He hadn't asked a single question. "My apartment, it's on Elmwood. Number 27B, she managed, her voice still shaky. "Please." He nodded once, a curt acknowledgement. Minutes later, he pulled up smoothly outside a modest brick building. He killed the engine. The quiet was profound. "Thank you," Eve whispered, fumbling for the door handle, desperate to escape the intensity of his presence, the lingering fear, the sudden vulnerability. "Thank you for not. Are you safe here?" His voice was low, smooth, like dark velvet. It held no warmth, only a detached assessment. Yes, I live here." She practically fell out of the car, needing solid ground, needing distance. She didn't look back as she hurried through the building's entrance door, her key scraping in the lock. Only when she was inside her small, dark studio, back pressed against the door, did she allow the delayed shock to hit her. She slid to the floor, shaking uncontrollably. The man's gray eyes, filled with that unnerving intensity, haunted her. And her book. She'd dropped Wuthering Heights in the alley. A small loss, but it felt like losing another piece of herself. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly. Eve felt hollowed out, scraped raw by the terror of the previous night layered over her constant grief. Coffee tasted like ash. She needed the sanctuary of the bookstore, the comforting smell of paper, the predictable rhythm. Pulling her coat tight, she stepped out onto the street, and froze. Leaning casually against the sleek black car parked directly across from her building was him, the man from the alley. He stood with an easy confidence, one hand in the pocket of his impeccably tailored charcoal coat, the other holding her book, Wuthering Heights. He looked utterly out of place against the backdrop of chipped paint and overflowing dumpsters. Panic, different from last night's but just as potent, lanced through her. Had he followed her? Why? Was he connected to the gangs? Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. She instinctively clutched the space where her wedding ring used to be, a phantom limb, a ghostly shield. He saw her, straightened, and crossed the street with long, unhurried strides. He stopped a respectful distance away, his pale eyes fixed on hers with that unnerving focus. He held out the book. "You left this last night," he said, his voice calm, that low velvet sound cutting through the drizzle. "Thought it might be important." A faint smile touched his lips. It wasn't warm, it was assessing, intrigued. It held an intensity that felt almost predatory. Eve stared at the book, then back at him, her heart hammered against her ribs. "How did you know where I live?" "You gave me the address," he replied simply. "Elmwood 27B. You seemed distressed. I wanted to ensure the book was returned." He extended it further. Reluctantly feeling trapped, she took it. The worn cover felt cold and damp. "Thank you," she mumbled, clutching it to her chest like armor. I need to get to work." "Of course." He inclined his head slightly. "Whispering Pages, correct? On Cedar and 5? The knowledge chilled her. "How do you know that?" "You dropped this near the alley beside it," he said smoothly. "Logical deduction. A beautiful store. May I walk with you?" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. She took a step back. "No, thank you. I'm married." The lie, the ghostly shield, slipped out automatically. It felt flimsy, pathetic, but it was all she had. His smile didn't waver, but it softened slightly at the edges. The unnerving intensity in his eyes gentled, replaced by something that looked like understanding? Or was it calculation? "Understood," he said, his voice lower, softer now. "Forgive my forwardness. Then let me be your friend." He paused, holding her gaze. "Consider me a safe harbor. Someone you can call if the world feels too dark again. No strings, no expectations." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrew a simple, elegant white card, and held it out. It bore only a name, Cassian Wolfe, and a phone number, embossed in crisp black. "Just a friend, Eve." He knew her name. From the bookstore tag? From elsewhere? The world tilted again. But the offer, delivered with that quiet sincerity, disarmed her panic momentarily. He placed the card gently on top of the book she was clutching. "Have a good day at the bookstore." He turned, walked back to his car, and drove away, leaving her standing on the rainy sidewalk, holding a battered novel and a card that felt like both a lifeline and a question mark. Cassian Wolfe. The name echoed in the hollow space where her trust used to be. Cassian Wolfe became a quiet, persistent presence at the edges of Eve's carefully controlled world. He didn't bombard her. He visited Whispering Pages perhaps twice a week. He would browse the shelves with a focused intensity that seemed incongruous with casual shopping, sometimes purchasing obscure historical texts or dense philosophical works. He always acknowledged her with a nod, or a quiet, "Good afternoon, Eve," his gray eyes holding that unnerving, perceptive gaze. He never lingered unnecessarily, never pushed. "Mrs. Henderson noticed. That handsome Mr. Wolfe seems quite taken with our collection," she remarked one slow afternoon, polishing her spectacles. "Or perhaps with our quietest bookseller." Her tone was gentle, probing, but kind. Eve just shook her head, busying herself with rearranging a display of poetry. "He's just a customer, Mrs. H." But she felt the weight of his attention, the silent observation. He saw her sadness, she knew. He saw the walls, and he didn't try to scale them. He just waited outside. One rainy Thursday the shop was empty. Eve was perched on a small ladder, trying to reshelve a heavy art monograph. It slipped. Before it could crash to the floor, a hand shot out, steadying it. Cassian stood beside her, effortlessly taking the weight. "Allow me," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet shop. He placed the book securely on the high shelf. His proximity was sudden, overwhelming. Eve caught the subtle scent of sandalwood and rain on his coat. She quickly descended the ladder, putting space between them. "Thank you," she murmured, avoiding his eyes. "Coffee?" he asked, the question hanging in the air. It wasn't demanding. It was an invitation, offered with that same quiet intensity. Eve clutched her hands together. "Mr. Wolfe, Cassian, I told you, I'm married." The lie felt heavier each time she uttered it, a chain dragging her down. He didn't look away. "I recall, and my offer stands. Just coffee, just conversation, between friends." He paused, his gaze softening infinitesimally. "You seem like you carry a great weight, Eve. Sometimes sharing it lightens the load, even just a little." He gestured towards the small cafe next door, visible through the bookstore window. "No expectations, just coffee." Something in his voice, in the genuine lack of pressure, in the simple observation that she carried a weight, cracked the dam. The loneliness, the constant ache, the suffocating silence within her own walls, it suddenly felt unbearable. Against every instinct screaming for self-preservation, against the fear of trusting anyone ever again, she heard herself whisper, "Okay, just coffee." Sitting across from Cassian in the warm, steamy cafe felt surreal. The clatter of cups, the murmur of other patrons, seemed distant. Eve stared into her untouched latte, the foam forming intricate, meaningless patterns. Cassian sat perfectly still, radiating a calm patience that was both unnerving and strangely comforting. He didn't fill the silence with small talk. He simply waited. The words, when they finally came, surprised even her. They started haltingly, like shards of glass being pulled from a wound. "His name is Daniel. We grew up together, childhood sweethearts," everyone said. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "We married 6 years ago." She traced the rim of her cup where her wedding band should have been. "Chloe, she was my best friend, since college. We told each other everything." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Or so I thought." She looked up then, meeting Cassian's pale eyes. They held no judgment, only deep, focused attention. That attention, that silent witness, unlocked the floodgates. The story poured out, not the sanitized version, but the raw, agonizing truth. Finding the messages, the timeline stretching back years, the double betrayal that poisoned every memory, the suffocating humiliation, the devastating realization that the foundation of her entire adult life was a lie meticulously constructed by the two people closest to her. The numb flight, the letter, the crushing weight of grief that felt like it would never lift. Tears she hadn't shed in months streamed down her face, silent and relentless. She didn't sob, she just let them fall, her voice trembling but steady as she laid bare the ruins of her heart. "They stole everything," she finished, her voice barely a whisper. "My past, my present, my trust, my belief in love, in friendship, everything." Cassian hadn't interrupted, he hadn't offered platitudes. He'd just listened, his gaze never leaving her face, absorbing every word, every flicker of pain. When she fell silent, drained, the quiet stretched. Rain streaked the cafe window, blurring the world outside. Then Cassian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the small table. His gaze was sharp, penetrating, seeing not just the grief, but the deep, simmering rage beneath the surface that Eve had tried so hard to bury. "They stole your past, Eve," he said, his voice low, compelling, resonating in the space between them. "They rewrote your history." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Do you want to let them simply move on? Build new lives on the wreckage of yours? Forget the devastation they caused?" His eyes held hers, demanding an answer she hadn't dared voice. "Or," he continued, the word dropping like a stone, "do you want them to truly face it? To feel the full weight of their choices? To understand in their bones the destruction they wrought?" The question hung in the air, charged and dangerous. It resonated with the dark, vengeful thoughts Eve had ruthlessly suppressed, the fantasy of them hurting as she hurt, of them losing everything. Eve asked, "Who are you that you can do these things?" Cassian responded, "Let's say corporations hire me when their CEOs need. Creative solutions. Embarrassments disappeared. Rivals neutralized. What will do to Daniel? This is Tuesday work for me." Cassian saw the spark ignite in her eyes, the hardening of her jaw. A ghost of a smile, devoid of warmth but full of purpose, touched his lips. "Justice," he said softly, "doesn't always wear a badge, Eve. Sometimes it requires a more tailored approach. a precise application of consequence. He leaned back slightly, his gaze never wavering. I have resources. I have certain skills. And I believe people like Daniel and Chloe deserve to reap what they have sown. Not violence, he added, anticipating her fear, but exposure, ruination of the carefully constructed facades they hide behind, a taste of the isolation they condemned you to. He paused, letting the offer settle. I propose, Cassian Wolf said, his voice a velvet promise, that we make them understand, fully, painfully, irrevocably. Are you in? Eve stared at him, the man who had pulled her from an alley, who had returned her book, who had offered quiet friendship, and who now offered retribution. The numbness receded, replaced by a fierce, terrifying heat. The rage she'd buried surged, bright and undeniable. Looking into Cassian's steady, determined gray eyes, seeing the cold fire of promised vengeance reflected there, Eve felt the first flicker of something other than despair. It was dark, it was dangerous, but it was power. Yes, she breathed, the word tasting like ash and iron. Yes, I'm in. The alliance with Cassian Wolf shifted Eve's world on its axis. The quiet despair was replaced by a focused, simmering energy. They met discreetly, never at the bookstore or her apartment. Cassian had a sleek, minimalist office high above the city and occupied the top floor of a discreet financial tower, accessible only via private elevator. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city sprawled like a circuit board below. Strategic Resolutions Consulting, read the frosted glass entry, the only indication this wasn't just another wealth management firm. Inside, monitors displayed live financial networks, encrypted chat streams, and geopolitical heat maps. Eve realized this was no ordinary consultancy. He solved unconventional problems for elite clients. She'd learn later, governments, Fortune 100 CEOs, and now, her. They would sometimes also use secure, anonymous locations he arranged. Cassian revealed facets of himself. In my line of work, we call this reputation recalibration, he explained, tapping a screen showing Daniel's financials. I run a private intelligence firm. Elite clients pay me 7 figures to solve problems that can't go through official channels. A sharp, analytical mind honed on complex systems, an intricate web of contacts spanning finance, technology, and information brokerage, and a chillingly efficient methodology. He wasn't a thug, he was a strategist, a master of leverage and consequence. The plan was meticulous, multi-pronged, and devastating in its precision. Eve was no longer a passive victim, she was an essential asset. Her intimate knowledge of Daniel and Chloe, their habits, their secrets, their vulnerabilities, their professional worlds, their social circles was the key. Cassian provided the tools and the strategy, Eve provided the blueprint. Daniel's downfall. Cassian focused first on Daniel's professional life, using Eve's insights into his work habits and the nature of his finance firm. Cassian's digital specialists found the cracks. Subtle manipulations of client portfolios, borderline unethical fee structures buried in complex legalese, a risky investment in a shell company Daniel had assured his partners was solid gold. He always cut corners, Eve confirmed, her voice cold. He thought he was smarter than the rules. Cassian orchestrated the leak with surgical precision. An anonymous, encrypted data packet appeared simultaneously on the desks of key partners, major clients, and financial regulators. The evidence was damning, irrefutable, and timed perfectly to cause maximum chaos just before a crucial board meeting. Simultaneously, whispers began. Carefully placed rumors in the right social circles, anonymous tips to society columnists. The whispers weren't about finance, they were about Daniel's personal life, his long-standing affair with a woman named Chloe, his devastated wife who had mysteriously vanished. The narrative Cassian crafted was brutal, a morally bankrupt man whose personal deceit mirrored his professional corruption. Eve watched from a distance, via secure channels Cassian provided. She saw the news alerts about the investigation launched into Daniel's firm. She saw the social media speculation explode. She saw a grainy paparazzi shot of Daniel looking haggard, fleeing his office through a back entrance. A grim satisfaction, cold and sharp, pierced the constant ache. This was consequence. Chloe's crucible. Chloe's ruin was more nuanced, targeting the image she cherished. Eve knew her Achilles' heels, her obsession with social status, her carefully curated perfect life on social media, a minor plagiarism scandal buried in her early marketing career, and her ruthless ambition masked by charm. Cassian's network went to work. The old plagiarism reports surfaced on industry watchdog sites. Anonymous emails, laden with damning details about her affair with Daniel, including timelines proving it predated the marriage, flooded the inboxes of her key clients, her boss, and the influential women in her social circle. Fake social media profiles, meticulously crafted, began seeding doubts and revealing unflattering truths in the comment sections of her perfectly staged posts. The most devastating blow came from Cassian's manipulation of Daniel himself. Facing professional annihilation and social exile, cornered and desperate, Daniel was presented, anonymously of course, with a choice. Publicly denounce Chloe as a temptress who pursued him relentlessly, or face complete personal and financial destruction. Cassian knew Daniel's self-preservation instinct was paramount. He chose. A tearful, self-serving interview appeared online, Daniel portraying himself as weak, seduced, manipulated by Chloe, who had allegedly threatened to destroy his marriage if he ended things. He expressed remorse towards his reputation, not Eve, painting Chloe as the architect of his downfall. The betrayal was complete. Chloe's world imploded. Clients dropped her. Her employer let her go. Her supposed friends, appalled by the depth of the deceit and Daniel's portrayal, turned their backs. Her meticulously curated online life became a digital graveyard filled with vitriolic comments. Eve was actively involved. She identified key social connections to target. She recalled specific events Daniel and Chloe had lied about covering for each other, which Cassian twisted into evidence of their collusion. She provided passwords to old, forgotten accounts Chloe might have used. Sitting in Cassian's office late one night, reviewing a feed showing Chloe leaving her apartment building, head down, shoulders slumped, flanked by shouting tabloid photographers, Eve felt a tremor run through her. Not pity, a profound, cathartic release. The ghost of Chloe's laughter, once a sound of friendship, now echoed only as a taunt, finally silenced by her own disgrace. "It's done for her," Eve stated, her voice surprisingly steady. Cassian, watching her reaction, nodded. "The facade is shattered, the isolation is complete. Now, we ensure Daniel feels the full chill of the wind." The bonds forged in fire. The intensity of their shared mission forged an undeniable connection. Eve witnessed Cassian's brilliance, his unwavering focus, his fierce protectiveness over the details of her vengeance. She saw glimpses of a past he kept shrouded, hints of his own battles, his own understanding of betrayal and loss. He wasn't just a benefactor, he was a partner in the shadows. He, in turn, saw her transformation. The quiet ghost of the bookstore was gone. In her place stood a woman of fierce intelligence, surprising resilience, and a steely determination that ignited when focused. He saw the vulnerability beneath the strength, the lingering pain beneath the cold fury. He saw her courage in facing the wreckage of her past to dismantle it piece by piece. Late nights planning turned into shared silences filled with unspoken understanding. A brush of hands passing documents sent jolts of electricity through them both. The intensity in Cassian's gray eyes when he looked at her shifted from strategic interest to something deeper, hotter. Eve found herself drawn to his calm strength, his sharp mind, the unexpected kindness he showed only to her. The walls around her heart, built brick by brick from betrayal, began to crumble not under an assault, but under a persistent, undeniable warmth that grew between them. Respect deepened into profound admiration, then into a powerful, terrifying attraction. The shared secrets, the shared purpose, the intensity of their collaboration, it forged a bond stronger than any she'd known before. She looked at Cassian, not with the blind adoration she'd had for Daniel, but with clear-eyed recognition of who he was, what he'd done for her, and the fierce, complicated feelings he stirred. She was falling in love. And the terrifying, exhilarating part was, she saw the same realization dawning in his eyes. The final act of vengeance was delivered with Cassian's signature precision. Leveraging the ongoing investigation and Daniel's plummeting reputation, Cassian unearthed evidence of a hidden offshore account Daniel had used to skim profits, a desperate move he'd made as his world crumbled. This final piece of irrefutable evidence, anonymously delivered to the lead investigator and the firm's remaining partners, triggered immediate disbarment proceedings and a swift public bankruptcy declaration. Daniel's fall was complete. Financially ruined, professionally destroyed, socially ostracized, and utterly alone. Chloe, meanwhile, had vanished from the city, her name a synonym for betrayal in their former circles, her carefully constructed life reduced to rubble. Their affair had ended in bitter, public acrimony after Daniel's televised betrayal, leaving them both isolated and despised. The need for vengeance, the burning coal that had sustained Eve for months, was spent. She stood on the balcony of Cassian's penthouse apartment, looking out over the glittering cityscape. The view was vast, impersonal, yet filled with possibility. The crushing weight of grief hadn't vanished, but it had transmuted. It was no longer a paralyzing shroud, it was a scar, a reminder, but not a prison. In its place was a hard-won peace, a fierce sense of independence, and a profound exhaustion. She had faced the monsters of her past, not by running further, but by turning and dismantling them, brick by rotten brick. She was free. She felt Cassian's presence before he spoke. He came to stand beside her, his shoulder lightly brushing hers. The silence between them was comfortable, charged with the unspoken words that had been building for weeks. He didn't ask if she was okay. He knew. He simply offered his presence, a solid anchor in the vastness. "It's over," Eve said, her voice quiet but clear in the night air. "It is," Cassian confirmed. He turned to face her, his pale eyes reflecting the city lights, intense and searching. "What now, Eve?" She looked up at him, truly looked. At the man who had found her in an alley, who had seen her devastation and offered not pity, but purpose. Who had respected her boundaries, challenged her strength, and stood beside her in the darkest undertaking of her life. Who looked at her now not as a project or a victim, but as an equal, as the woman he loved. "Now," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in over a year. "I live. For me." She reached out tentatively and touched his hand. "With you, if you'll have me." His answer wasn't in words. He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with a possessiveness that felt like shelter, not confinement. His kiss was deep, passionate, a claiming and a promise, sealing the bond forged in shared fire and secrets. It spoke of a future, not built on stolen moments and lies, but on hard-won trust, fierce loyalty, and a love that had blossomed in the ashes of betrayal. The wedding was nothing like her first. There was no grand church, no crowd of guests holding their breath. It was held in the sun-drenched back garden of Whispering Pages, transformed for the afternoon. Fairy lights twined through the climbing ivy on the brick walls. Rows of mismatched chairs, borrowed from the cafe and the shop itself, were filled with Eve's new chosen family. Mrs. Henderson, beaming and dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Dave, the grumpy but kind barista from next door. Maya, the shy art student who worked weekends at the store, and a few other bookstore regulars who had become genuine friends. Cassian had only one guest. Marcus, his chief operations officer who handled field operations for strategic resolutions. The discreet, sharp-eyed man radiated quiet competence and deep loyalty. Eve wore a simple, elegant ivory dress, not a traditional gown. She carried a small bouquet of white roses and blue forget-me-nots. As she walked down the makeshift aisle, lined with stacks of books lending their quiet dignity, she didn't feel like a princess in a fairy tale. She felt like a warrior queen claiming her peace. She saw Cassian waiting for her beneath an archway woven with honeysuckle, deliberately chosen, a symbol reclaimed, his gray eyes holding a warmth and devotion that took her breath away. The ceremony was simple, heartfelt. They spoke their own vows, promising honesty, unwavering support, and a love born not of naivety, but of seeing each other truly, scars and all. As the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Cassian kissed her, not with the chaste promise of her first wedding kiss, but with a deep, passionate certainty that echoed the life they would build together. Sunlight streamed through the large front window of Whispering Pages, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. Eve, her hair loose down back, a simple silver band now gracing her left hand beside Cassian's platinum one, expertly guided a customer towards the mystery section. Her movements were confident, her posture relaxed. The profound sadness that once clung to her like a shadow had lifted, replaced by a quiet contentment, a grounded strength. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was home. The little bell above the door chimed, its familiar sound now carrying a new note of joy. Eve looked up. Cassian stood there, leaning against the doorframe, his gaze fixed solely on her. He wasn't in one of his impeccable suits today, but dark trousers and a soft sweater. In his hands were 2 steaming takeaway cups from the cafe next door. A warm, knowing smile spread across Eve's face, reaching her eyes, lighting them from within. It was a smile of shared history, of battles fought and won together, of secrets held close, and of a deep, abiding love forged in the crucible of betrayal and reborn in trust. Cassian smiled back, a rare, full smile that transformed his sharp features, reflecting the same profound understanding and contentment. No words were needed. The quiet look they shared, across the space of the bookstore filled with stories, spoke volumes. It spoke of a painful past acknowledged, but no longer feared. It spoke of a present rich with peace and partnership, and it promised a future, built not on stolen dreams, but on a foundation of honesty, hard-won trust, and a love that had found its way through the darkest alleys into the warm, welcoming light. Eve turned back to her customer, her heart full, the ghost of honeysuckle replaced by the comforting scent of old paper and the bright promise of tomorrow. The story wasn't over. It was simply beginning a beautiful new chapter. Enjoyed the story? Like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss the next one.